Hello, everyone. I hope you're all doing well considering what's going on in the world at the moment. But it is that time, once again, to talk about everything that I watched in the past month. And I'm going to be honest, I watched quite a bit in February, which I'm quite surprised at, considering it felt like February just whizzed by. A bit too fast, if you ask me. But that being said, I managed to fit quite a few films in, so without any further ado, let's get straight into it. The first thing I watched in February was My Son. Not my son. I don't have, I don't have any children. No, this is a new film starring James McAvoy and Claire Foy, and is a pretty typical crime thriller. If you look at it, at face value, it's a story about a young 10-year-old boy that goes missing, and you are following a load of people trying to figure out what happened to the boy, but most importantly, you are following this from the father's perspective as he tries to figure out what exactly happened to his son, and whether he can get to the bottom of it all. Now, that does sound like the most generic crime thriller plot you could think of. And it is, but there is one thing about this film that makes it stand out compared to most other shows or films that attempt this very story. You see, the thing about this film is that everyone in the cast were given a script, like usual, except for James McAvoy, who is playing the father in this film. He was not given a script at all, and was given very, very vague directions on the days of shooting, which means every scene that he is improvising all of his dialogue, and it is adding an extra layer to the central mystery and just the overall confusion that his character would be feeling at that specific point. And as soon as I heard that that was the gimmick of this film, I was immediately hooked, and also James McAvoy is a brilliant actor, and I'm going to watch pretty much anything he's in. And thankfully, this film was a lot better than I was expecting it to be. In terms of the actual story itself, yeah, we've seen that sort of thing a million times before, but that core gimmick of James McAvoy improvising everything really does add an extra layer of confusion that really comes out in his character, and he does a really good job improvising in all the scenes that he has to. Also, I thought this film was really well shot for what it was. The film didn't have to do anything particularly special in terms of its presentation, but for what it is, I thought it was actually really well presented, and the cinematography was actually really, really good. After that, I then watched David Fincher's adaptation of The Girl with the Dragon Tattoo for the first time. This is one of two David Fincher films that I've never seen before, the other one being The Curious Case of Benjamin Button. And I went into this film not quite knowing what to expect, because I know a little bit about the source material. I've never read the book, but I know its reputation. The same goes for the original Swedish trilogy of films that were based off of the books. That being said, though, I went into this film not really knowing much about it other than, a couple of things here and there. And I came away really liking it. I was a bit worried at first because the first act of the film is a little bit choppily handled and is a bit all over the place. Like you're following one character 1 minute and then following another character another minute. And I was really waiting for that moment where things would start to interlink and be a bit more focused, but it took it took a while to get to that point. And for the first about 20 to 30 minutes, I was a bit like, okay, this had better improve at some point. However, once the core mystery is set into motion, everything becomes a lot more streamlined and focused, and it knows exactly what it needs to do and does that really, really well, which is why I ended up really, really liking this film. One thing I love about this film is that it does not hold back, and it really does do a good job of being faithful to that reputation that the original books and the original films had, because there are many scenes in this film that are very, very hard to look at, and I've seen a lot of films, and it takes quite a bit for a film to do something that intense that kind of makes me go, oh, not sure about that. Then I watched Joanna Hogg's The Souvenir, which I've been wanting to watch since 2019 when it came out. I didn't really know much about this film going into it, and it shows, because this film is nothing like what I thought it was going to be. Because going off of the poster and the trailers that I haven't seen for a good few years, I presume this film was about a relationship that didn't quite work out that well. I was completely wrong. This film is about a lot more than that, and if anything, that is really not the main thing of the film. What the film is about somebody who is in a relationship that, as a viewer, you can see is not good for them, but they are so blinded in that relationship that they don't know any better, and it really keeps playing on that specific thread multiple times throughout the film. And with most other films, and I know this is something the film received criticism for when it came out, is that the relationship is so obviously bad for the main character that you're just like, get out of there. You know, and there were a couple times where I was just like, leave the guy, he's not good for you. And I can understand that being a main criticism, but considering that this film is an autobiographical telling of Joanna Hogg's own life, at least that's as far as I'm aware, there's an extra layer of believability to everything, and the way everything is presented in the film in a very neutral and realistic manner makes everything a bit more believable. After that, I then watched the original Texas Chainsaw Massacre for the first time, and I'm just going to say it, this is probably the best thing I watched all month. I've been wanting to watch this for ages, because I've heard so much about it, but the main reason I watched it in February was because the reboot/sequel was coming out later, and don't worry, we will get onto that in a second. But yeah, I absolutely love this film. This is one of those films that is very simple in terms of what it wants to do and its execution as well, and it doesn't do anything more than that. It is just doing what it wants to do really well, and that is all I wanted from it, and that is all it does. In terms of it being brutal and gory and horrific, it's more intense than anything else. The actual gore itself is rather tame, and they do cut away from a lot of the blood that is shown. But that being said, the film itself has such an unnerving and unsettling feel and atmosphere to it from the moment the film starts, that is more effective than the actual violence itself, which is why I loved this film so much. Then for some reason I watched 8 Mile, aka the film with Eminem in it from 2002. I don't know why I watched this. It might have been a case of I saw it on Netflix. I've always been intrigued by this film and wanted to watch it, so I just stuck it on, for the hell of it. And I came away pleasantly surprised. It's nothing groundbreaking. In terms of it being a drama, it is very formulaic and does not break away from that typical Oscar baity, very overdramatic sort of story. And when it goes for those specific elements, it really does play it exactly how you think it's going to go. But it throws in a few things here and there in terms of its characters and story that can throw you for a loop every now and then. However, the best aspects of this film by far, and are what kept me engaged within the film from start to finish, were all the performances. Even Eminem, I think he was really good in this film and really works for some of those dramatic scenes, and the rap battles. Those are the most important aspects of the film, and they are really, really well handled. Then we have Steven Soderbergh's new film, Kimi, which I didn't know was a thing until I saw people talking about it on Twitter and YouTube, which then got me intrigued. And at this point, I'll happily watch anything Steven Soderbergh makes, because I think the guy is a genius, and in terms of aspiring to be a filmmaker myself, he is a really good role model in terms of low budget filmmaking and just getting on with it yourself. So I admire him in that sense. And Kimi is one of the best examples of making something relatively low budget in a very short time span, because I'm pretty sure they shot this during the COVID pandemic, either in 2020 or the start of last year. And it is slightly incorporated into the film, and you know it is there, but unlike other pandemic films that were shot during lockdowns, the COVID is not the main focus of the film. It's just there in the background. The main focus of this film is the thriller story that is on show, which is that the main character hears something that was picked up on a Kimi device, and she tries to figure out what it was and whether someone was murdered, and tries to get to the bottom of it. Now, I am someone who really likes contained claustrophobic thrillers that just have a very simple plot and just do nothing else but that. Like, I don't know, Rear Window, or even 10 Cloverfield Lane as a somewhat recent example. Something that is very suspenseful and very tense, but has a very straightforward plot and doesn't try to do much else beyond that. It just does what it needs to do well. And Kimi is a really good example of that. It uses modern technology in a way that doesn't feel tacky or gimmicky. It uses it in a way that is relevant to the story and works for the sake of the story as well. But the highlight for this film for me were two specific things. First of all, Zoe Kravitz, her performance in this film was fantastic, and I really believed everything she was going through in this film. And the other aspect I loved about this film was Steven Soderbergh's direction and his camera work. This film has some of the most efficient camera work I've seen in a long time. Like, every shot that happens in this film does not feel wasted. There is not like a shot inserted into the edit that just feels like it was there for the sake of it looking nice. Every shot needs to be there for a specific reason, whether it's to show you something important or to show the story progressing, and everything is just, it's just so well made. And then we have Texas Chainsaw Massacre 2022. Right, where do I start with this one? I went into this film not really expecting it to be particularly great, but I had a little bit of optimism because I'd recently just come off of the original, which was incredible. But like I said, I didn't know what to expect with this one. I was not expecting it to be particularly great. I was not expecting it to be this bad though, because this film ended up being pretty bad. There are some aspects that held it back from being really awful. For example, it's really well shot, and the kills are pretty insane at times. Like, there is a bit where Leatherface snaps a guy's arm backwards and stabs the guy with his own bone, in his arm. Like, that is such a simple yet creative kill that I'm surprised no one's really done it before, or if it has been done before, I've never seen it. However, outside of the kills and the cinematography, everything else is a bit bland. Like, the characters, for example, are very forgettable. The performances are fine for what it is, but I just don't remember any of them. And even the one interesting character played by Elsie Fisher, who I loved in Bo Burnham's 8th Grade, even she feels a bit like wasted potential. She tries with what she tries to do what she can with what she's given, but in the end, I just did not care for any of the characters. After that, I then watched Celine Sciamma's Petite Maman, which I was very excited to see considering all the buzz it got at the end of last year. I came away liking it. I didn't love it as much as I wanted to, I just came away liking it. And I feel the thing that stopped me from loving it as much as everyone else does is the fact that there was something missing for me. There was an element that was missing that didn't grab me the same way that Portrait of a Lady on Fire or even Tomboy did. Because with those two films, I was hooked immediately, and the way they were executed just kept, pulling me back in as the film went on, whereas Petite Maman sets up something interesting and feels like it does the bare minimum with it. Though I liked a lot of the themes and messages this film had, and the two girls who are the main actresses in this film, they are really good. But there is just something about this film where it's like, okay, now I want a little bit more from it. Then I watched Michael Haneke's 1997 cult classic, Funny Games. I don't really want to say too much about this film because I intend on doing a full-blown video about this version and the 2007 US remake, also directed by Michael Haneke. But all I'm going to say here is that I liked it for the most part, but it felt like there were certain things conflicting in the film itself that I didn't know how to take. If you've seen the film, you might know what I mean. It's mainly to do with the fact that the majority of the film, specifically with how it approaches violence and showing it to the audience, is very grounded and realistic and very depressing because of how realistic it is. But for me, that kept conflicting with the fourth wall breaking element of the film, which felt like it was trying to be tongue-in-cheek, but because the rest of the film is so realistic and grounded, it felt like that they were both at conflict with each other. Then I watched The King's Man, which is obviously the prequel to the Kingsman films and establishes how the Kingsman organization was first created. I was intrigued by this film when it was announced because I like the Kingsman films. Of course I'm going to watch it. Even though Golden Circle did leave a bad taste in my mouth back in 2017. But that being said, The King's Man is 10 times better than The Golden Circle. Purely because The Golden Circle felt like it was overindulging in things it thought people liked about the first one, such as, oh, that church fight was really good. Let's just keep doing that same sort of herky-jerky, fast camera movement so goddamn many times in the sequel. Also, people liked the profanity in the first one. Let's just double the amount of times they say that fuck, It was things like that, plus the scene where Eggsy has to do something to a girl and the camera does something and it's very questionable. There are a lot of things about Golden Circle that I don't like. The original I still love, but the sequel, yeah. The King's Man, on the other hand, just goes back to basics. It doesn't try to do anything particularly crazy or weird, especially when you're considering Golden Circle. It just tries to do something very straightforward and does it really well. After that, I then watched this new thriller called No Exit. Again, I didn't really know much about this film going into it. I remember seeing a trailer for it a little while ago, but I must have forgotten it. But I decided to check it out because it was on Disney+. And I ended up quite liking it. It's not an amazing thriller, but in terms of just being a well-made thriller that is about an hour and a half, an hour and 40 minutes long, it's pretty well done. The performances are all really good. It's pretty damn well shot. And yeah, in terms of just being a thriller, it does a good job in really raising the tension with each scene that passes. Like, something happens, oh, let's just add something onto what has just happened to then increase the intensity and increase the suspense. And I really liked that about this film. It just kept adding one extra thing to what was happening in the film to increase the tension. And I really liked how the film dealt with that. In terms of thrillers in general, I would say I still prefer Kimi in terms of ones that have been released so far this year, because I think Kimi is just better executed in every way. But No Exit is still a solid thriller, and if you're looking for something somewhat disposable that is entertaining for what it is and is pretty damn tense when it needs to be, give No Exit a look, because I think it is actually better than it has any right to be. And finally, the last film that I watched in February was the film adaptation of Uncharted. Listen, I went into this film with a fairly open mind. I really like the video games, specifically 4, A Thief's End, which is my favourite game in the series and is one of my favourite video games of all time. I love that game so much because of its character work, its set pieces, just everything about that game is just so goddamn good. And the other 3 games are also really good as well, for similar reasons. And I was a bit skeptical going into this film, but like I said, I tried to go in with an open mind, and for what it isn't terrible. It's perfectly fine. I suppose the biggest issue I had with this film is that it did exactly what I thought it was going to do, and not much else. Like, it's a perfectly fine adventure film about people looking for treasure, and that's about it. The end product feels a little bit like a combination of National Treasure and the film Sahara, starring Matthew McConaughey, if anyone remembers that, which is actually not a bad film. I quite like Sahara. But the end product of Uncharted kind of feels a little bit like a mishmash of those 2 films, with some elements of the games thrown in there. Tom Holland is fine, and the performances as a whole are, they're decent. But unfortunately, I can't get Tom Holland as Peter Parker out of my head, and there were elements of his performance in this film that I just kept thinking, Spider-Man, not Nathan Drake, that's Spider-Man. I really like Tom Holland as an actor. If you've seen The Impossible or The Devil All the Time, you will know that he is able to do performances that are not Spider-Man. But unfortunately, ever since he was cast as Spider-Man, he's kind of been stuck in a bit of a typecast, and I hope he manages to get out of it soon by doing some more diverse roles, like The Devil All the Time, which I still think is a brilliant film. So guys, that is everything I watched in February. I hope you enjoyed the video. If you liked the video, then give it a thumbs up, and subscribe to the channel if you haven't done so already. Also, comment below with your thoughts on some of the films that you watched in February. And yeah, I look forward to reading them, and I will see you all in the next one. Bye.